Hello and welcome to Frost Over the World. Later in the programme, the world's top shoemaker, Christian Louboutin, and Northern Ireland's Deputy First Minister, Sinn Féin's Martin McGuinness. Plus, we've got a historical whodunit for you. But right now, we take a look at foreign policy. Having called 2011 a pivotal year for democracy, 2012 has so far been an exceptionally busy year for diplomats. Having to mediate on the Arab Spring and the constant crisis in Syria, working on talks with Iran, and closer to home, a Eurozone struggling to recover, it's by no means been a quiet time, for instance, for the British Foreign Secretary, William Hague. With the withdrawal from Afghanistan of British troops also imminent, I sat down with him to discuss what are the most pressing issues for the coming year. William, great to see you again.
Thank you.
Here we talk in the ambassador's waiting room at the Foreign Office. Simple question to start with. Today, is there still a ceasefire in Syria?
Well, there is an attempt to have a ceasefire in Syria. The Assad regime is not fully compliant with that ceasefire. They were meant to withdraw their forces from populated areas, and of course some fighting has continued. And so no, there isn't a complete ceasefire. And so it's very important the Annan plan is fully implemented, that more monitors go in as quickly as possible, so that we can see whether a ceasefire can be, a real ceasefire, can be brought about at all. But it isn't fully in place at the moment.
Abu Qatada. In that situation, we have an odd development in a way, which is that a branch of al-Qaeda has said, if we will not send Abu Qatada to Jordan, but to one of the other Arab countries, they in return will release Stephen McGowan.
Of course, it's very clear that we do intend to send him to Jordan. We've been talking to the Jordanians about that. The Home Secretary, as you know, has been pursuing that for a long time. It's never been, and it won't be, the policy of the British government to negotiate with terrorist groups in any way. And in any case, the individual hostage they seem to be talking about lives in South Africa and has a South African family. So no, we will continue with what we intend to do about Abu Qatada, and we'll do that in the face of any threats.
Is there a bit of a thaw with Iran after the last talks Lady Ashton had and so on? It seemed as though we were talking about more talks, and you don't always get more talks with Iran in another 3 weeks' time, and so on and so forth. Has there been a bit of a thaw in the relationship with Iran in the last 6 weeks, 8 weeks?
No, there hasn't been a thaw. I think there has been some discussion on the ice, I think would be the way to put it, rather than a thaw. Some talking is going on the ice-covered lake of relations with Iran. The talks that took place last month in Istanbul were better in their atmosphere than previous attempts to negotiate with Iran. And Iran did not set preconditions, unrealistic preconditions that they set on previous occasions. And that's why we're able to agree to a second round of those talks, which will take place in Baghdad on the 23rd of May. We want the Iranians to know, and the world to know, that we are sincere about those negotiations, but we're also very determined about the pressure that we're putting on Iran. The EU is stopping all oil imports from Iran from the 1st of July. Indeed, most of them have stopped already. We will continue to intensify the pressure on Iran until or unless they can persuade the world that their nuclear program is for peaceful purposes. So those negotiations have begun. They've begun in a better atmosphere. That is a positive step forward. But we haven't yet seen any actual change in the behavior of Iran, or these negotiations haven't entered a substantive
And what could they do that would make you sit up and think things are changing? What could they do?
What we want them to do is to accept the offer that we've had on the table for a long time, which is that we will actually help them with peaceful nuclear energy. And that offer has been there since 2008 from European nations, provided they will abandon any military aspects of their program or things that they are doing now which are not consistent with a peaceful nuclear program. The enrichment of uranium to 20%. The UN Security Council resolutions call on them to stop enrichment of uranium, to be completely open to the International Atomic Energy Agency. We want them to do those things.
And after 2014, if things went wrong in Afghanistan, could we go back? Could our troops go back into Afghanistan because something had gone seriously wrong?
Well, you can't foresee the future. We never expected to be in Afghanistan in 2001. But I stress again that we are building up the Afghan National Security Forces to one of the largest armies in the world. Already the Afghan National Army and the Afghan National Police are more than 300,000 strong. That building up of those forces is continuing. They're increasingly in the leading role in maintaining their own security. All our plans are geared to Afghans looking after their own security. So the combat role of British troops will come to an end at the end of 2014, and we're not planning to resume that combat role after that.
You're not planning to, but you wouldn't rule it out 100%.
I don't think you can rule out anywhere in the world what will happen, but clearly what we're engaged in is a transition to Afghan security and Afghans maintaining their own security. We will be helping in many ways. We've announced we will have an officer training academy in Afghanistan. Britain will be committed to the future of Afghanistan in many ways. So there will be British officers doing that training. There will be all our development aid to Afghanistan, our economic cooperation with them. Britain will be still heavily involved in the future of Afghanistan, but the Afghan forces will be big enough and capable enough to maintain their own security.
In terms of Syria, all the comments in the last few days seem to suggest that we are concluding that it has got bloodier on both sides.
At the moment, it is sliding again in the wrong direction. But this, as I say, is the urgency of sending more monitors, of supporting the Annan plan. The Annan plan doesn't have indefinite time and can't go on forever, but we do want it to work. The whole United Nations Security Council is united about that. So it is not too late for the Assad regime to really implement the 6 points that were set out in Annan's plan. But that includes starting a political process, it includes pulling back their forces from populated areas, and it includes a cessation of violence. Now they have not done those things, or they have only partially done those things. So they need to do so if this plan is to work. And if it doesn't work, of course, and as I say, there isn't an indefinite amount of time for it to do that, if it breaks down because of the attitude of the Assad regime, well then, in that situation, we will be returning to the Security Council, we will be intensifying our support for the opposition in Syria, and there will be other countries who will argue for that they will send arms to the opposition or whatever other actions they wish to take. So it is the best thing for Syria, for the Assad regime to properly implement the Annan plan.
You said in the past that famous quote of yours about the euro is a burning building with no exits and so on. Is that still an accurate quote, do you think?
It is. It's a building that's been on fire, yes. That has eased a little. The flames have got more under control in the last few months as the European Central Bank has acted to improve the liquidity of the banking system in Europe. But of course the solution to the burning building with no exit is to put out the flames. And that requires not only a strong banking system, but it also requires growth getting going in Europe. But the way to get growth is not to spend more money that doesn't exist. The way to do that is to push forward with the single market, have more free trade areas with the rest of the world, reduce taxes on businesses as we are doing here in Britain, get rid of regulations that interfere with people doing their businesses. Then I think we could get some growth going in Europe. So that's what we have to keep up the pressure for this year.
Yeah, for growth in Europe. And at the same time, what do you feel? There seems to be a rise of the extreme right in some of the countries in Europe that are suffering the euro crisis. Is that concerning you?
Yeah, it is concerning that there is, it's not just the extreme right, it can be the extreme left as well, of course. We're awaiting this coming weekend the Greek elections. There are several different parties on the left as well as the right in France. You're obviously referring to that. The National Front received 18% of the vote. This is concerning, and this underlines, I think, the importance of doing the sort of things I've just been describing, of those governments as well as our government, adopting policies that allow businesses to prosper and grow. Otherwise, of course, there will be ever-increasing public dissatisfaction. It's very important that all nations get their finances in order, again, as we're doing in Britain. But there also has to be hope for the future. And that is what we believe we are creating in Britain. We want our European partners to do the same.
Do you think that countries like Britain and France could, would, or should give up their seats at the UN Security Council in order that Europe should have a seat?
No, I wouldn't ever agree to that. It's very important for Britain and France to maintain their seats on the Security Council. We've seen the importance of that over the last year. For instance, in Libya, it was Britain and France working closely, of course, with the United States and working with the Arab League, who secured the necessary resolutions to save lives in Libya. Britain and France have been instrumental in backing the Annan plan that is the hope now, for the best hope for any peaceful transition in Syria. So we play a big role on the Security Council. We are nations that are with not only a big diplomatic network in the world, but that are prepared to use our armed forces to support what we do diplomatically. And so I think we are I think it's right for us to be on the Security Council, and it would not be right for any regional organisation, European Union or any other organisation, to replace the nation states on the Security Council.
You've said more than once that the central massive proliferation of nuclear weapons and so on, nuclear proliferation, is the most massive danger that we face. Do you still feel that?
Yes, it is. Looking over the next 10 or 20 years, there are, of course, some huge dangers for the world. One is international terrorism, although we've discussed some of what we're doing about that. One is climate change, but one very clear one is proliferation of nuclear science. Nuclear science is becoming more widely available, and that increases the dangers of nuclear weapons proliferation to more states or ultimately to terrorist groups.
How many countries have nuclear weapons at the moment?
Well, that of course is a point of debate, because not all countries declare their nuclear weapons. There are the obvious nuclear weapons states, those are the permanent members of the Security Council, but we've also seen India and Pakistan develop nuclear weapons, and then proliferation to North Korea. Of course, it is believed that Israel has nuclear weapons, and then there is the Iranian program. So this is still a small, proportionately a small number of the nations of the world. But if across the Middle East many more countries acquire nuclear weapons, well then all hope of the Middle East being a nuclear weapons-free zone would come to an end, and that is something that many people hope for. And the world's most unstable region at the moment would possess the world's most destructive weapons. That is not a happy combination.
But as you look ahead, what do you think is, of all these issues we've discussed today, what do you think is going to take up most of your time in the next year, because it's perhaps the most urgent or perhaps the most worrying?
I think what's taken up most of my time in the last year has been the events of the Arab Spring. And I think that will go on in many ways, because we remain in Britain very optimistic about that. This is people wanting their freedom. This is people wanting dignity for their country and opportunity for themselves, the sorts of things we want in Britain, and we can absolutely understand. Now, in some countries that is leading to a steady improvement. If we look at what's happening in Morocco or Tunisia or Jordan, governments have embarked on changing, after a change of government in Tunisia, on changing people's rights and opportunities. In Egypt, there is more of a struggle going on. In Libya, there has been a violent struggle. In Syria, there are the terrible events we are talking about. I think this is a process that will go on for some years and continue to throw up different crises and conflicts. But we have to maintain our belief in the people of that region and help them where we can to have the freedom and the opportunity that we enjoy.
And from what you've said in the past, you're saying really that there can't be a future for Syria as long as Assad is still in power.
Well, that is my view. I think so much blood has been spilt, so many people have been killed, such crimes have been committed, that he cannot restore his credibility in the world or even among his own people. But it is up to Syrians it should be up to Syrians to decide that in a democratic way. And the Annan Plan includes a process of negotiation, a political transition towards a more plural democratic society in Syria. So we all want Syrians to be able to decide that themselves. But certainly my view is that a leader who has killed so many of his own people cannot restore his credibility and leadership in the eyes of the world.
William, thank you very much indeed.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Our thanks to William Hague there. And now 1974 we move to next. It's a time of turmoil the world over, not least in Chile, where a violent coup by General Pinochet had ousted the elected government of Salvador Allende. And Pinochet became the military government's president. Many frightened Chileans, frightened above all by Pinochet, descended on the Italian embassy for refuge. They were joined by a dead body thrown over the embassy wall, which we'll come back to in a second. And a young Italian diplomat at the time, Emilio Barbarani, recorded what had happened in fact, a book which came out recently and underlines the fact, Emilio, that this crisis, this tragedy of the dead girl, still very much in your mind, very much in your thoughts.
Yes. I was serving my country in the Italian consulate in Buenos Aires when, at December 1974, a telegram arrived from Rome. You are ordered to be in 24 hours to Santiago de Chile, where has been created an emergency situation in the Italian embassy. There was Mr. Tommaso de Vergottini, the so-called ambassador, but he was there without any accreditation because the relationship between Rome and Santiago were completely cut.
Right, and at that moment the embassy was filling up with frightened Chileans that we just mentioned there. Why did they choose the Italian embassy?
Not only the Italian embassy. At the beginning, many embassies opened the doors to the politically persecuted people. But the Italian embassy remained open to those kind of people for at least 2 years, when the other embassy, after a few months, closed their door. Why? Because as it is described in the book at the beginning, the Italian internal political situation in which the Communist Party was one of the biggest in Europe, sustained the Chilean opposition. They ordered us to remain with the doors open as long as possible. So our embassy filled up of political persecuted people.
And when, after you arrived, how soon after you arrived, did the body of Lumi Videla...
10 days after the arrival, during the curfew in the night of a corpse, I arrived in Santiago de Chile from Buenos Aires, and I discovered that this girl was a member of the MIR party, MIR, an extreme left-wing armed party who died after 1 month of interrogatories by the Chilean secret police of Pinochet Dina with the husband, and the corpse was thrown inside our garden, in where there were 100 at least 100 political persecuted people who knew her very well. So you can imagine the crisis, psychologically speaking, the crisis with the 100 people of our guests inside the embassy.
And in fact, Dina and the Chilean government, the Pinochet government, apparently said that the body was killed, that the girl Lumi was killed inside the embassy, to put the blame on the Italian embassy, when in fact she had been tortured to death and then the body thrown over in order to frame, as it were, the Italian embassy.
That was the beginning of the terrible misunderstanding. The military said she has been killed inside during a party, an ambiguous party. And all the people inside told me no one had never seen Lumi Videla inside the embassy. We discovered the corpse during the night. They used to have a group of wards inside. They heard a noise. They arrived there with the lamps and they found this corpse, white like a paper, with signs of torture, and they recognized immediately Lumi Videla.
And from your diplomatic and Italian point of view, let's just turn to present events for a moment. With all that's going on with Europe and the euro at the moment, would it have been, as many Greek people say, it would have been better if Greece had never joined the euro? Do you think it would have been better if Italy had never joined the euro?
Sir David, when I was young, I have been grown up in the idea of Europe. We called in those times Europe, and today we would call it strong Europe. The euro was a piece of this strong Europe which has never been created. Today we have a euro which created problems to some partners of the European Union. And of course, the problems are there, every one of us can see it. But in the old project of Europe, euro was a piece which had been worked with other pieces of reconstruction. Today, of course, we have problems. And I don't know how they will be solved, because they are great problems. From people who say, yes, shall we continue with the euro? Yes, or to other people which doesn't like euro and they don't want euro. This is a very delicate question. It is very difficult to answer.
Thank you so much, Emilio. Pleasure to have you with us.
Sir David.
A real pleasure. In a moment, that extraordinary shoe designer, Christian Louboutin, after this short break.